Hi everyone, it's Elizabeth here. So today I wanted to do this video in regards to the art and balance of giving and receiving, specifically giving and receiving love. Life is really complicated today, and I do think we live in a world or a society, at least in America, and in part of the Western world, that we are suffering from a lot of mental and spiritual illness and sickness. And when this comes into play, a lot of times we tend to become opportunists, or we live our lives through the ego or through really shallow means by trying to get things from other people rather than living life through a more divine purpose of being here, to serving people, to doing good, leaving the planet a better place than what you know it as today. So giving and receiving can be very difficult for people who are not aware of what it is or aware of their actions or their behaviors. A lot of times relationships become very imbalanced because there is an imbalance between giving and receiving. A lot of times you have one person that's the giver and the other person that's the taker. And the taker is so used to receiving and taking everything that he or she forgets to kind of return some of that giving, more or less. And the one thing to know is that from an energetic standpoint, energy is all around us. We are made of energy. The universe is made of energy. We are made of the same things, of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The sun is made of the same stuff as us. So everything in life is energy. But in the world of spirituality, you have masculine and feminine energy. The right side of the body is the masculine side. The left side of the body is the feminine side. Giving is a masculine trait. It is part of masculine energy, and receiving is feminine energy. If you think about the act of sex in itself, generally the man is kind of giving himself to the woman is kind of receiving, the man, if you think of it that way. So a lot of times with the balance of relationships, with a man who is highly masculine, maybe a little bit more alpha, and a woman who's very feminine, generally the man is either courting the woman or is giving a little bit more than the female because she is being receptive. That's a lot of that old paradigm shift in a lot of the old methods of dating, through courtship, where the man, is either giving small tokens of gifts or giving, his money away in terms of like paying for a date and things like that. So the thing is, I'm not saying old traditional methods of dating are wrong or anything like that, but I do think we have entered a stage where there is a little bit more of a fight and balance for equality, and that in some sense is a balance between giving and receiving. So giving and receiving, we do this from very conscious and unconscious actions. We do this a lot of times naturally throughout the day. If you see an old woman who's, holding a grocery bag and really struggling to open the door, maybe you might offer to carry her bag, her grocery bags to her car and help open the door. So in some ways you are giving an act of service or an act of kindness to help somebody out without, any expectations of anything in return. But giving and receiving, especially in a romantic relationship, is an exchange of energy. And so a lot of times, the relationships are really messed up today because now you're seeing this flip-flop where you have a lot of men who want to be on the receptive side of taking, and you have a lot of women who are tapping more into their masculine energy by giving and mothering the men. So it's important for both people to be at a point of maturity, not only on the logical world, but also on a spiritual sense, to be able to recognize when there are these things of imbalances. And when there are times of imbalance, it's really important to have some form of border or boundary to understand, where you feel like you're being taken advantage of, or maybe you're giving too much and you're becoming depleted. I see this a lot with what I call the giver soul. The giver soul is a lot of times you see these people, they work in some form of activism or animal welfare or in social work, counseling. They're constantly giving themselves, they're giving their energy, they're sharing their wisdom, they're giving their thoughts and their opinions to people. And a lot of times these people live in a world of selfless service, which is not a bad thing, but to some degree, some of these people are so good at giving and they constantly want to give and give and give that they're not receptive to receiving at all. And at the end of the day, this does lead to an imbalance and it will end up creating a block. When you are being blocked to receive some form of love or touch of kindness or a favor from somebody, you are not open to receiving. And a lot of times these giver souls, the root cause of all of this giving without any form of receiving, because these blocks have been formed on an energetic level in the body, a lot of this roots to a lot of self-love. These people don't have really good thoughts about themselves. They don't have good self-worth or good self-esteem. The other end of the spectrum is the more self-absorbed, selfish soul, which is very arrogant or has a lot of pride and egotism. And a lot of these people end up becoming takers. They almost become a taker in the point of it being a consumeristic experience. It can borderline that narcissistic type of tendency where it's like, I'm so special, I deserve this, I deserve all of this energy, and that in itself can become very parasitic. It can become very toxic, not only for him, but for the other people, because literally what they are doing on some form of energetic level is that they're almost, if a narcissistic man is with a giver soul, he almost has control of the nucleus of the woman's brains. It's almost as if they are like a psychic vampire, just constantly sucking and draining the life force energy out of the other person. So generally, a lot of times these giver, maybe more empathetic type of souls end up attracting, some form of like a parasite or a toxic person, because those type of people are constantly living in the dark and they have to fuel themselves, and the way to fuel themselves is through the energy of the light. So balance must be attained between giving and receiving in order to receive or to have a harmonious flow. A lot of this comes to having self-awareness of your own actions, awareness of the other person's actions. Okay, are you giving too much? Are you receiving too much? Are you trying to give to your partner, but your partner isn't receptive? A lot of this just ends up coming down to just some blunt conversations. They're really, and a lot of analytics in terms of analyzing the energetics of the person, or being like, God, I constantly give and he's not listening, or he's not receiving, or something like that. So I think the root cause of every lack or issue in a relationship comes down to communication. So it's really important to have an open channel and an open line of communication. So the one thing I do want to say is that giving does not necessarily make you a better person. Some people give because, they do believe in karma and they just want the good things to happen to them. The reality is, like I mentioned earlier, is that giving should come from a selfless service, but not to the point to where you're a doormat, but it's because you are here as a human being living through your soul mission, but also completing some form of a divine mission. So you're trying to spiritually feed people. That's why a lot of people love spiritual leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Christ and Amma, because a lot of these people are just giving from a very selfless place without needing anything, not needing anything in return, but they also love themselves and they understand how the divine works and they are happy on their own and they have self-esteem. So it comes from a place of being somewhat content and kind of whole and complete to some degree. And the thing is, taking doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. A lot of people think that receiving or taking something or accepting, if somebody's like, hey, I'll help you move, and you accept their gesture, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just in terms of a balance. But the thing is, expectations can really lead humans down a negative path. So the thing is, you want to make sure that giving and receiving is harmonious, it comes from a genuine place, and it's not transactional. If you are constantly expecting or thinking of things from a transaction point of view, it's like, oh, well, I gave you this present, so I'm expecting a favor in return. That's why a lot of businesses, like when you work for the government, you can't accept some form of bribe, because that in itself has an expectation that you'll, choose that company when they bid on, the construction of that building in the future. So you can't accept a lot of those things because there is an expectation. In my yoga training, my guru always said never accept a gift from somebody because there is always an expectation in return. So as long as you're doing things from a point of authentically wanting to do it, but if you have an expectation that it's transactional, that's where things kind of become crippled and fall apart and generally won't sustain itself in a healthy term in the long run. So giving, you should give because it's a higher form of divine service that is based on love and harmony of oneself. Those who block receiving have some form of lack of self-love or egoic issues. So a lot of times people treat other people how they treat themselves. And this is kind of interesting because a lot of people think that because they're empathetic or they work in a giving industry that they really are treating people with kindness and to the best of their ability, but the reality is that a lot of them aren't. If you're lying to other people, most likely you're probably lying to yourself. If you're trying to manipulate other people, maybe you're manipulating yourself, or maybe you're just so hard on yourself that you can't allow yourself to see the good that you've done in your life. And a lot of this is root to fueling the ego. The ego is the biggest enemy of anyone's life and relationship. There's this quote that says a 3-letter word ego ruins a 12-letter word relationship. So, if you kind of put that into perspective, a lot of times when you try to fuel your ego more, there tends to be issues in a lot of relationships because either you're too arrogant or you have pride or you think you're better than everybody, you're developing some narcissistic type of tendencies. So most giving and receiving imbalances come from a lack of self-love, and it's not coming from a place of kind of the arrogance and the narcissistic method. I already mentioned that. So yeah, those with self-love issues will often treat people the way that they treat themselves, or other people tend to treat other people really good, but they treat themselves shittily. I see this all the time in health and fitness. People feed and clothe and bathe their dog better than they treat themselves. They feed their dog, organic chicken and rice or organic kibble, that comes from locally sourced salmon from the Alaskan waters. But then when it comes to themselves, they hate themselves so much that they feed themselves like shit by eating fast food and stuff like that, or they're a sugar addict. So it's really interesting when you start to look at this stuff. It's not only giving and receiving within yourself, but finding that tipping point and that balance in your relationship. It does take two to tango, and this is the difficult part, if two people aren't open to having that conversation or having that awareness, that's where things are really difficult, especially if one person is more evolved or spiritually evolved and the other person isn't. They're a little bit more mundane, kind of living in the mainstream world type of thing. That can get really challenging because you have one person that's seeing something from a higher point of view and the other person is still kind of on, planet Earth with their feet and stuff like that. And maybe they live it more from a transactional point of view. So it's really important to have somebody that's on the same wavelength and have the same moral compass and values as you do. So these are just some thoughts. It's an exchange of energy. If you do give, it shouldn't come from a place of wanting to receive anything back. But you also have to realize that when you get to a point to where you give too much, maybe you have to scale back, or maybe you have to have that conversation with your partner. Because a lot of times things start off reciprocal in the beginning, and then as time goes on, the imbalances generally happen. If you have any thoughts on giving and receiving, please share them below. We can all learn from each other. You can post that in the comment box. I have just some other blog links posted down below that are related to this topic. Please subscribe to this channel. You can help me build it. You can also support me on Patreon if you like my message and my voice. And thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. See you next time. Bye.